3 years after The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man is back, and this time he's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, better known as the MCU, joining the largest Marvel characters in film history. Spider-Man Homecoming is the third Spider-Man film interpretation, following the original Sam Raimi films and the Amazing Spider-Man series. This version of the character was first seen in Captain America Civil War, and this film very much picks up his character arc from that film. However, is Spider-Man Homecoming a good take on the character? Does Spider-Man manage to fit in nicely into the MCU? Most importantly, does the film offer entertainment, as well as a compelling story that everyone's favorite web-slinger deserves? Now, there will be spoilers in this review for Spider-Man Homecoming, so I suggest you first see the film yourself and then return to this review afterwards. Now then, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and see what the film has to offer us. First, let's very briefly take a look at the plot of the film. For the most part, it's your typical standard Marvel film, which works just fine. It's technically an origin story for Spider-Man, however it isn't, since he already has his powers and he's been Spider-Man for quite a few months now. The film assumes that the viewer has seen the previous films in the MCU, since it glances over the Battle of New York from Avengers and the Ultron attack on Sokovia from Avengers 2, as though they were common knowledge. With how important these events, along with the fight in Civil War, are for the film, you'd think they would have spent just a little more time explaining them a little better, in case anyone hadn't seen the previous films. I don't think it should be a requirement to see the previous films in order to fully enjoy this one. Also, despite the film being titled Homecoming, the homecoming dance is a very minor point. It isn't even brought up for the first time until the film is almost entirely over. Though Homecoming probably does refer less to the dance in the film and more about Peter's homecoming as Spider-Man, embracing the role. The story is very straightforward, and it probably won't lose the viewer at any given point. It also does a good job of balancing Peter Parker and his time in school with Spider-Man and his time helping out around New York. There aren't any major twists in the film other than the big reveal that Adrian Toomes is Liz's dad. But that's fine because the film is engaging and entertaining the entire way through. That's about as much of the plot as we're going to discuss though, so let's go ahead and take a look at the characters. In general, the supporting cast for this film is kinda lackluster and pretty forgettable. Peter's best friend Ned seems to be an original character made specifically for this film, though he could be an amalgamation of a few comic characters. Ned is relatively funny, and he has a lot of great moments, but there are some times in the film where his character just sort of falls short. He spends a good portion of the film doing nothing other than just talking about how cool Peter is, how cool Iron Man is, how cool it is that he's a hero. He's also somehow able to hack into Tony Stark's systems through the spider suit, using nothing more than a basic laptop and hotel Wi-Fi. This doesn't really make much sense, because Ned isn't shown to be a computer genius by any means. Sure, he's a smart kid, but he doesn't seem like the type of person that can easily hack Tony Stark's equipment, and he does this on multiple occasions. Still though, Ned is a pretty good character, and he's one of the best supporting characters. The character of Michelle is a character that I honestly didn't like all that much. At first, she seems to be the typical loner character, and that would have worked. However, her interactions with the academic decathlon team show this not to be the case. She spends the entire film doing weird and random things, such as reading a book about human bondage during gym class, or going to detention just so she can draw people when they're at their lowest. Several of her lines, such as her statement about how the Washington Memorial was built by slaves, makes it quite hard to understand what her character is supposed to be and who she's supposed to be. She seems to genuinely care for others, seeing as how she was quite worried when the other members of the academic decathlon were stuck inside of the collapsing Washington Monument. But almost all of her actions in the film are left unexplained, and they take up time that is really unnecessary. She antagonizes Peter in every scene they're in together, for no real explained reason, and no understandable reason at all. The film would change absolutely nothing in the slightest if her character were to be removed. She's supposed to be a main character because Zendaya's name is on the film's official poster, whereas Laura, whose character has a much larger role, isn't even on the poster at all. Judging by the fact that she wants to be called MJ at the end of the film, Michelle seems to be very much this series' version of Mary Jane Watson. Michelle's character is vastly different, so she'll only be MJ in name, and she really shouldn't be compared to Mary Jane at all. For now, at least. We'll see what happens in the future. I sincerely hope the sequel explores more of Michelle's character, because she could have been a good character, but the way she was used in this film made her unlikable and unnecessary. She had no purpose, and if she was removed, the film would not change at all. Flash Thompson in this film was changed from being a typical high school jock bully to a much subtler bully for Peter. He's on the same academic decathlon team as Peter, but it's made quite clear he isn't as smart as Peter, and he's likely the least intelligent one on the team, since he serves as an alternate, and even when he does alternate, he doesn't answer any of the questions. This change to Flash's character was made so the film could represent a more modern take on bullying, a much subtler one. This was an interesting change, however it just doesn't entirely work. See, the reason Peter typically never stands up to Flash is because Flash is clearly much stronger than him, and Peter can't do anything to defend himself until he gets his spider powers. Once Peter does get his powers, he has the ability to stand up to Flash, but he doesn't because it would be a misuse of his powers, and he knows not to do that. Here though, there isn't any real reason as to why Peter doesn't stand up to Flash. Flash doesn't appear to be physically intimidating. and sometimes Peter actually appears to be taller than Flash in some scenes. So why Peter doesn't do anything to stop Flash from picking on him or standing up for himself is a mystery. Flash's character as a whole isn't even that much of a bully for Peter. All he does is call him a liar about knowing Spider-Man and call him one really uncreative nickname. While having Flash be a modern representation of bullying, rather than your typical jock picking on a nerd, was an interesting idea, I don't feel it was utilized the best way that it could have been, and Flash's character is ultimately left forgettable. Liz is Peter's love interest for the film, but as far as love interests go, she's kind of bland, honestly. For the first half of the film, all she cares about is the academic decathlon. Once that's over, all she cares about is homecoming. Her character is very one-dimensional. When Peter finally works up the courage to admit he likes her, all she responds with is, she knows, and he's bad at keeping secrets. When Peter asks her to the homecoming dance, she accepts, but she said it was because she was so busy planning she forgot to get a date. It's never really made clear if she liked Peter back or not. It is hinted heavily throughout the film that she likes him, however she doesn't get a reason for liking him, and their interactions are very minimal. There's very little insight to her character at all. The only good thing the film did with her character was having her father be Adrian Toomes. This created extra conflict for both Peter and the Vulture, and it added an extra layer to their characters. The last supporting character is Peter's Aunt May. Now typically Aunt May is portrayed as being elderly and frail. This version, however, is quite young comparatively. There are quite a few jokes in the film about people thinking that she's hot and trying to get her attention. This is quite the interesting change, because usually Peter has to grow up very early in order to take care of Aunt May, who can't take care of herself after Uncle Ben has passed away. Here though, Aunt May is able to take care of both herself and Peter. This lets Peter stay younger a little longer, stay a little more immature for a while. Unfortunately, the dynamic just isn't explored as much, as Aunt May is barely even in the film, and when she is in the film, all she ever does is worry about Peter and worry about Peter. Even though she was made younger, she's still relegated to just staying at home, worrying about Peter, wondering what he's doing, and this just makes the viewer wonder, why was she aged down in the first place if they were going to do something interesting with her character? She's younger, she can go out and do something, but she still does nothing. The film ends with her potentially finding out that Peter is Spider-Man, though this is left unclear and it's really just a joke. Her reaction to finding out also seems quite out of character and doesn't fit in with either the usual portrayal of Aunt May or even this younger version of her. Now for the main character of Spider-Man. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is the youngest version of Spider-Man, being only 15 and a sophomore in high school. This is great, because many people just seem to forget Spider-Man started off as a young high school student. He didn't start off when he was a senior or when he was in college, he started off young. Peter in this film is awkward and nerdy, like he's supposed to be, and that's amazing. When he's Spider-Man, his jokes and his quips are really good. He feels how he's supposed to feel. He's Spider-Man. Tom Holland delivers one of the best performances of Spider-Man in a long time. But unfortunately, there are issues with this Spider-Man. He's not perfect. Most of this comes from his admiration of Tony Stark. For practically the entire film, his motivation is nothing more than trying to prove himself to Stark. He's tired of Stark treating him like a kid, he wants to be an Avenger, he wants to go out and save the world. While having hero worship for Stark and the Avengers makes a lot of sense, considering the fact that he's barely starting out as a hero, and they're publicly known and loved figures, it takes away from his character. What has always been the appeal and the charm of Spider-Man is that he's a teenager, but he's an independent hero, and he's trying to figure out how to be a hero on his own. Spider-Man is young, he's inexperienced, he's unsure of what to do, but he does the right thing, and he manages to figure out what makes a hero all on his own. He learns to become a hero, he does this through trial and error, and he struggles along the way. Here though, Stark is really holding his hand a lot of the time, whether it's him personally coming in to help, sending one of his remote-controlled suits to help out, or simply having Happy watch over Spider-Man and make sure that he isn't in over his head. All of this works to show how Stark keeps holding Peter's hand and guiding him how to be a hero, rather than Peter figuring it out on his own. There's also all the different Stark gadgets, but I'll get to that in a moment. For now, let's move on to the villains. The Tinkerer is a great henchman. He has several good scenes, and he spends most of the time creating weaponry for the Vulture. Out of all the characters in the film, I honestly feel Tinkerer is the one that's closest to his comic counterpart. I do wish we had gotten a bit more development from Tinkerer, because we have no idea why he's working for the Vulture, or how he's smart enough to be able to work with alien tech so easily. He's also one of the only 3 villains not to be arrested, so hopefully the sequel can expand on his character. He was very enjoyable and very well done, but kind of underdeveloped, so the sequel can fix that problem. Next up is Shocker, or should I say Shockers, as there are 2 people who take up the mantle of Shocker in the film. Both Shockers are very underutilized and just a waste of a character. The first one is accidentally killed by Vulture, and the second one gets taken down by Ned. Neither Shocker is memorable in the slightest. The only purpose they serve in the film is to be a tough henchman for Vulture. Shocker also only has 1 shock glove for some reason, and it looks odd compared to his usual 2 shock gloves. Shocker is really the biggest disappointment in the film, as his role could have been filled with any other character and it would have been the exact same thing. He's just a henchman, nothing else. All he does is fight and distract Spider-Man so the Vulture can begin their plans. This did not need to be Shocker, and the fact that it was Shocker is a gigantic disappointment. Having one of the enforcers in Shocker's place would have worked much better, because the enforcers are known for being nothing more than tough henchmen, and that's what Shocker was in this film, a tough henchman who had no purpose. Hopefully Shocker returns and is given a bigger role, because his character was handled not that well here, and it's disappointing to watch and a disservice to his character, as Shocker is quite an important character. Finally, we have the main antagonist of Vulture. Now, Vulture's origin is usually tied closely to Oscorp. However, since Oscorp hasn't been established in this universe, that was substituted by none other than Tony Stark and Damage Control. Adrian Toomes and his salvage company are cleaning up the Battle of New York when Damage Control steps in to take over, putting Toomes out of business. Toomes decides to have Tinkerer experiment on the weapons they salvage, and they build weapons from it so that they can sell them. This origin makes a lot of sense, and it makes it seem as if Toomes was forced to become the Vulture after Damage Control and Stark put him out of business. He had no choice but to do this so he could provide for his family and survive. He even mentions this to Peter in their final confrontation. He says that the guys on top always step on the little guys, that doing the things he does are the only way he can survive anymore. This would have been a great character motivation, except it doesn't really make sense when you stop and think about it. Toomes' company already had a contract to clean up the Battle of New York. When Damage Control was assigned to take over the job cleaning up, legally, Damage Control needed to reimburse Toomes and his company for any money they had already invested into the project, as well as the time they had put into it. Toomes makes it seem as if though Damage Control ended his company, because he had already invested into cleaning up the Battle of New York when they took over, and he lost everything he put into it. His company should still be in the same state it was before he started investing into cleaning up the Battle of New York. Damage Control has a legal obligation to pay Toomes and his company, because Toomes had a legally binding contract that assigned him to that job. With this in mind, a lot of his character motivation is lost. Why invest in weapon dealing when you have a viable company? And if Damage Control doesn't reimburse Toomes for whatever reason, why not take legal action against them? He has a legally binding contract that assigns him to this job. He has a clear case towards getting reimbursed and getting his money back from Damage Control. His business, his company, they are both safe. Aside from that, there's another issue with the Vulture, and that's the fact that he's an arms dealer in the first place. This is a drastic change to his character, as he's never been directly involved in weapons dealing before. Even ignoring the fact that Vulture doesn't have a precedent for being an arms dealer, this decision still doesn't quite work in the film. It's a bit confusing as to why he would be selling these weapons in New York. A huge aspect of his character is he looks out for his family. He's trying to provide for his family. He cares for his family. But he's selling the weapons somewhere his family can get hurt. The weapons are clearly powerful, and they're unsafe in the wrong hands, but it doesn't show that he takes any precautions to make sure his family isn't injured by the destruction they would create, being sold around New York. This issue could have been easily fixed, and the film doesn't even have to change at all. Just include a post-credit scene where Tinkerer, who remained uncaptured by the end of the film, meets up with a mysterious figure who is revealed to be the true head of the weapon-selling business, and Vulture was just a figurehead working for him. This figure can be any of Spider-Man's notable crime boss villains. It can be Frederick Foswell, Silvermane, Tombstone, Hammerhead, etc. This fixes the issue of Vulture being an arms dealer, because he's working for a higher-up who has a clear precedent in arms dealing. And it fixes the issue of his family's safety, because clearly whoever he's working for would promise him his family would remain safe and unharmed from any of these dealings. It also beautifully sets up a villain for the sequel. Still though, despite these issues, what we got was very enjoyable. Vulture is a great villain, do not get me wrong in the slightest. Despite the issues I mentioned, Vulture was menacing and entertaining at the same time. He was one of the best parts of the film, he was a great main villain, he just isn't the perfect villain many people claim he is, because his motivations kind of fall apart, and he's kind of out of character. The film, while enjoyable, does suffer from its fair share of problems, some larger than others. As discussed earlier, the supporting cast in the film is very forgettable and overall weak. Both Spider-Man and Vulture are great characters, and they both offer amazing performances. This is especially important because the two of them are the main hero and the main villain respectively. But two characters cannot carry an entire film, no matter how great they are. And trust me, these two were great. It's also quite ridiculous how Vulture finds out about Peter being Spider-Man. All he does is talk with him one time, and notice every time Peter isn't around, Spider-Man is. By this logic, literally everyone should be able to figure out Peter is Spider-Man. If people who are close to Peter cannot figure this out, how did Vulture figure it out after talking with him one time? It just doesn't make any sense. The film also makes a lot of changes to characters, and some of these changes are just questionable. Now, changing a character is perfectly fine and understandable. This is an adaptation. It should not be expected to follow the source material perfectly, and it has creative liberties. But in general, there are two well-accepted rules for making changes in any adaptation. First of all, if you're going to make a change, there should be a reason for making a change. It shouldn't be an arbitrary change. Secondly, a character's core personality and core characterization should never be changed, because that's who they are. They should still feel like the characters are supposed to be, and they should still resemble where they came from. Homecoming unfortunately messes up both of these departments. Several of the changes that are made amount to nothing and are just pointless. One big example is Betty Brant, who is made a high school student in this version for absolutely no reason. Her character is basically a cameo. Why make a change if you're not going to do anything with it? Utilize these changes and build a good story. Why do this? It makes no sense. As for the second one, Vulture is a major example of getting this wrong. Vulture had so much changed about him, and there are several points where it doesn't feel like he's the Vulture. He's some crime boss, and the Vulture's never been a crime boss. On the other hand, this can be a good thing. It made the Vulture more menacing and much more memorable. However, you have to ask, if so much was changed about the Vulture, to the point where sometimes he doesn't even feel like the Vulture, why did they use the Vulture? Why not use a villain that fits the role they want to fit? Why not use a villain that fits the role the Vulture is playing more naturally, and save the Vulture, or any villain for that matter, for a film where he can fit in, without having to change almost everything about his character, and making him someone he was never meant to be? The biggest problem with Homecoming, though, is a lot of times it just does not feel like a Spider-Man film. It's always a Marvel film, and it's always a superhero film, but it's not always a Spider-Man film. Tom Holland's performance is wonderful. He manages to get the awkward charm that Peter has, along with the quick wit that Spider-Man has, but that isn't enough to keep this Spider-Man the entire time. Spider-Man's power set in this one seems kind of limited. Sure, he has his enhanced strength, his agility, and his ability to cling to walls, but other than that, he has almost nothing to offer. His signature spider sense isn't in the film, even though it was implied he has a version of the spider sense from Civil War. There's also the matter of Spider-Man's motivations. A lot of the film is simply him doing things so that he can prove himself to Stark, that he's ready to be an Avenger. He's driven by a need to impress Stark, and a need to earn his spot with the Avengers. At the end of the film, he has earned his spot with the Avengers, but he turns it down. At first, this seems like amazing character development. He's grown, he's learned there are more important things than being an Avenger, he wants to stay grounded. But immediately afterwards, he asked Stark if that was a test, and if he had passed said test, showing that after everything he's gone through, he still wants nothing more than Stark's approval. Even if this is just a joke, it undoes so much of his character development and so much of his growth from the film. Another important part of Spider-Man is his ingenuity and his creativity, but unfortunately, thanks to all of the gadgets that Stark has given him, we just don't see any of this. Rather than making his own suit to fit his needs, he just receives one from Stark. When he's falling from the Vulture, rather than being creative and making a parachute from his webbing, he has a built-in parachute that Stark gave him. Rather than building his spider searchlight, because he realizes fighting crime at night is difficult with limited visibility, Stark provides him with one. Rather than experimenting with his web fluid in order to come up with creative new combinations and techniques, Stark just programs in over 500 web shooter variations. Rather than improvising and hoping that his last-minute plan works, he has his AI Karen guide him a lot of the time. What makes this even more frustrating is the fact that after Stark takes away everything he gave Peter, Peter still goes out to fight the Vulture. He proves he can be a hero on his own. He demonstrates ingenuity, quick thinking, and creativity that Spider-Man is known and loved for. He doesn't need the gadgets to survive. But then, the film ends, and Stark gives him everything back. At this point, Peter should not need Stark's suit or his gadgets. He should turn them down in favor of making his own suit, his own equipment, being his own person, his own hero, being independent. It's quite difficult for Spider-Man to ever leave Stark's shadow when he's literally being handed everything by Stark. The lack of Uncle Ben also affects how Peter acts in the film. I can completely understand not showing the death of Uncle Ben. It is something that has become common knowledge due to how popular Spider-Man is and how many versions there have been, but his death should still have some impact on Peter. Even if they are not going to show his death, a single mention of it would have been nice. This is early in Peter's career as Spider-Man. The death of Uncle Ben should still be something he holds close to his heart, something he still has hanging over him. It doesn't have to be explicit, it can be subtle, but something to show Peter is struggling to do the right thing, because he messed up and Uncle Ben died. This should still affect him. It's early, he's young, he shouldn't be over this. This goes a long way towards developing his character, and it's not present at all, which is sad. One last issue with this film is there are just so many continuity problems. For the most part, the MCU has done a great job of keeping continuity amongst all of its films and the extended universe, which includes the television series and the Netflix shows. but Homecoming ruins so much of this continuity. First of all, there's the huge issue of this taking place 8 years after the Battle of New York. The Battle of New York has been shown multiple times to take place in 2012. First of all, there's the fact that Iron Man 3 takes place 6 months after the Avengers. Iron Man 3 takes place in December of 2012, and we know this because a flashback from December of 1999 was 13 years ago. There's a newspaper heading that places the Battle of New York in 2012, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. shows the Battle of New York to be 2012 multiple times in their first season. If this was really 8 years later, then Homecoming takes place in 2020. Another continuity problem involves Peter. Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Entertainment, along with Tom Holland, both have stated that the boy Iron Man saves in Iron Man 2 is actually a young version of Peter Parker. Well, Peter is currently 15. Take away 8 years, that puts us at the Battle of New York, and Peter is 7. Then take away approximately 2 more years for the events of Iron Man 2, that would mean Peter is 5. While the face is hidden behind the Iron Man mask, judging just based on the size, this kid is much older than 5. And the last continuity problem comes in the form of damage control. Now, unlike the last continuity problems I mentioned, those can be seen as nitpicks, but this one actually has a huge impact on the story and ruins the story. In the beginning, Adrian Toomes and his salvage company are picking up the wreckage of the Battle of New York when damage control steps in. This is a problem though. The first episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Skye tells Coulson that S.H.I.E.L.D. covered up the Battle of New York and cleaned it up overnight, before anyone could ask any questions or investigate. Coulson confirms this, saying S.H.I.E.L.D. has to keep people safe, it's their job. Now, if S.H.I.E.L.D. was in charge of taking care of the Battle of New York, how was Toomes able to get his hand on literally anything? And why was Damage Control called in the first place? Damage Control is stated to be a government department, funded by Tony Stark, so they shouldn't have a reason for stepping in when S.H.I.E.L.D. has already taken care of it. Even if Skye's claim of covering it up overnight is an exaggeration, S.H.I.E.L.D. being there makes it difficult to believe Toomes was able to get literally any of the Chitauri tech for himself. It gets even more complicated though. In the 8th episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson and his team are sent to London so they can clean up the damage Thor caused in Thor Ragnarok. Coulson once again makes it very clear S.H.I.E.L.D. is in charge of cleanup duty during these situations, and Damage Control is nowhere to be seen in London. Now it can be explained Damage Control doesn't have jurisdiction to step in. They're an American government agency. But later in the film, Damage Control has equipment from the Ultron attack in Sokovia. How was Damage Control able to step in and clean up Sokovia, but not London? Furthermore, why does Damage Control even need to exist when S.H.I.E.L.D. has been shown on multiple occasions to be in charge of cleaning up these events? Damage Control is pointless when S.H.I.E.L.D. already has their own team. Damage Control is a huge driving force behind the plot of Homecoming. It's a major motivation for the main villain of Vulture. But this inconsistency makes it so Damage Control should not have a purpose. This damages the film as it's supposed to be connected to the larger MCU. The ending is also just terrible, and by ending, I mean literally ending the final scene. Ending on Aunt May potentially finding out that Peter is Spider-Man, only to exclaim, "What the?" That is just not a good way to end the movie in the slightest, and whoever thought that was a good idea should really rethink that. For all the negatives I have been saying though, the film does have quite a lot of positives. It's filled with several teasers and Easter eggs of potential characters for the future. Cindy Moon, who eventually goes on to become the hero of Silk, is in the film. And even though she doesn't have a prominent role and is more of a background character, it's still very nice to see her inclusion. Miles Morales is teased, because the thug that Spider-Man interrogates mentions he has a nephew, and in the Ultimate Universe, that nephew is none other than Miles Morales. Matt Gargan, who later goes on to become Scorpion, has a pretty small role in this film, and he seems to be based on the Ultimate version rather than the mainstream version, though they use the name of Matt Gargan over the Ultimate version's Maximus Gargan, meaning they might be going for an amalgamation of the two. Amadeus Cho may also potentially be in the film, though that one's a little unclear because some of the information states a character with a single line is him, others say it's not, but if it is him, that's also nice. If it does end up being Amadeus, similar to with Cindy, it's a nice nod to the characters. While it would be very wonderful to eventually see these characters, Cindy, Miles, and Amadeus, become the superheroes that they're meant to be, for now it's just nice seeing them being mentioned and introduced into the universe. That's suitable enough. One final note, the film has my favorite post-credit scene ever. Nothing will ever top that. It will be the best post-credit scene forever. Also, I do have to admit, despite my complaints that Peter relies on Stark and his gadgets too much, Stark himself isn't in the film all that much, and that's a great thing because it makes it Spider-Man and not Iron Man Homecoming as many were calling it. The promotional material, the trailers, the TV spots, the posters, they all made it seem like Stark was going to be this huge deal, this major part of the film, but he thankfully wasn't, and that is just perfect. It's Spider-Man's film as it should be. Spider-Man Homecoming had so much to deliver, being the second reboot, as well as properly introducing these characters into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What it did well, it did very well, but unfortunately what it did wrong, it did very wrong. Despite having two main stars that were able to carry pretty much the entire film, the supporting cast is all forgettable and mostly unentertaining. The villain was threatening and well done, while Peter's journey to become a hero was equally entertaining, even if sometimes it did feel off and unclear. Overall, I have to say Spider-Man Homecoming was just an average play. While this review focused very much so on the negatives, that's merely because the negatives seem more prominent and the positives seem more subtle. But I did like this film, I enjoyed it very much, and I wouldn't mind seeing it a second time. It's entertaining, it's definitely worth watching, but however it is by no means the best Spider-Man film ever, as many have been claiming, and it's not even the best MCU film. What did you think of Spider-Man Homecoming? Do you find it to be the best Spider-Man film, the best Marvel film, or did it just sort of fall short of the expectations you had for it? Let me know all of this and more in the comment section down below. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time!